The myth is that you need these really expensive, super razor sharp, huge lenses. And that's bullcrap. I've been doing this for over 25 years. Every photographer should have a fast prime, but what I'm here to tell you, sharpness is not what makes amazing photos. And what I'm gonna show you today is how we actually do it. We're in this old ruin in central Mexico. It's an old hacienda. I just finished a session where we went up to these old ruins of a hacienda with Seim, and we did these sunset photos. And this one thing is gonna make you see and shoot everything differently. I did this particular session on the ZF, right? But I didn't actually use this little 40 that comes with it. Almost the entire session was done on this, which is the classic Nikon 105-25 manual focus lens. This is the 80s and 90s iconic lens that Steve McCurry shot Afghan Girl on, and it's just considered like this magic portrait lens. But the secret to all this is it doesn't matter that much which lens you use. I also took my Sony 85mm 1.8, which I can also adapt to this. And the Nikon, I use an autofocus adapter, which makes me much more prone to use an old vintage lens as the primary lens on a session. Go back to photography icons, like for example, Alfred Stieglitz, or you go to Ansel Adams and you look at his darkroom work, or you go to controversial legends like David Hamilton and the way they did these soft glows using positive slides and things on the lens and stuff like that. Some of these techniques I've shown videos of replicating here on the channel, and I've worked very hard at those, and they can be difficult, but there's a common theme in those techniques because it's not really about copying one person's look or a specific lens or a specific camera that you need to use. It's about atmosphere. Sean helped me with these behind the scenes video during the shoot because it was this really cool place down here in central Mexico, just this little puebla out in the middle of nowhere that no one goes to, and there's this whole ruins of this hacienda. And you just walk into this place and it's like, oh, this is magic. And I'm thinking about this scene, right? And the atmosphere. And there's so many ways you could do this. And we did some that were a little bit sexy and others that were very elegant. Now, pretty much all these nice, soft, elegant ones you see were taken with this Nikon. And there's two parts to this tip today. The first part, we have this obsession of we need the best and the sharpest lens, right? So, oh no, I don't even want the 1.8, I want the G Master, I want the red line, I want the best lens. What I've learned is I can put a vintage lens on, or I can put a mid-level quality lens on, or I can take a micro four thirds and have a small lens, but all of these variables can be good. Now, we've all used a really crappy lens, like a plasticky, garbagey kit lens that's completely uninspiring, that's like, you know, f3.5 to 6.8. Yes, there are lenses that are low quality, and they kind of have artifacts and chromatic aberration and weirdness. And then there's lenses that are crazy, high quality, like my Canon 24mm tilt shift version 2. And it's huge, and it's beefy, and it's super sharp, and it's great for landscapes and things like that. But do I use it that much? No. This light is small, but remember, softness of your light is relative to its size in relation to the subject. So if we're putting the light close, it's going to come out really soft. The mistake we often make is thinking that the best photo comes from our sharpest lens. I don't want to use a junky lens, but I don't necessarily need the sharpest or the most modern coated lens. As I often do to start, I came in and used Cine S on this from Filmus. So I usually use one of the Filmus looks, a Portra, an Agfa, something like that, to give me that look. And I really wanted this kind of soft, gentle look. This is why film presets work so good, and I'll put a link to my free sampler Filmus pack in the comments so you can check it out. You'll notice on film presets, and oftentimes on your favorite in-camera profiles, which are just presets, like on a Fuji camera or something like that, they're actually reducing things like clarity. If you look at this, I have lower texture, lower clarity, lower dehaze, but the photo doesn't feel particularly soft. I could put a ProMist filter on, for example, and get a little more atmosphere. But you notice what portrait photographers and non-portrait photographers are often doing. While we think that we should be pushing sliders up, or that we should be using our sharpest lens, what we should actually be doing is looking for a feel, looking for an atmosphere, looking for an emotion. In this AI world where everything's fake, we want soul in our photos. We want things to feel organic and real, and maybe even a little bit imperfect. We're in a hacienda that's hundreds of years old. Everything's just falling apart. and it's just a glorious place to take photos. But you don't have to be in the most amazing place ever. I use these same techniques if I'm just standing in the pepper trees somewhere or next to a river. Now let's go over to this one. Here it's more difficult. We have backlit sun coming in. There's not a lack of sharpness. The photo's clear and clean and everything looks good. You can see here, if I look at the raw file, that it's kind of blowing out. It's kind of crazy. So in this case, I actually processed this with some sky masks and a natural HDR preset from Natural HDR 5 instead of just to film it, because I wanted to really pull out the dynamic range, but not try and make it look too perfect, too HDR. And I actually used the Simply Rich HDR from Natural HDR 5, another pack on my site that you can download a free sampler of if you want to play with these concepts. And you can see here we have a little more clarity, a little more texture, but a lot of control over the shadow and highlight. Point one is in camera. It's the lenses we choose and the way we shoot in the angles. And that is how we create atmosphere. And the second point, and the great photographers of the past did this as well when they were printing, the second point is how we edit it. But if you think about this lens, I didn't put a lens hood on it. I actually do have one, but I usually don't take a lens hood, particularly with portraits. I let it flare. I actually moved around and I thought about how the sun was coming in. I knew I was going to be kind of blowing out. I did have a little bit of strobe here coming in. I have this distinct flare. It almost looks like a light leak on film, right? Now I could come in here and I could paint this out, right? I don't even really have to use generative fill. And, you know, I could tweak it a little bit more, but this is just a normal healing and it looks fine. But I didn't take it out. I will intentionally move these lenses, and you can do this with modern sharp lenses as well, but you tend to get more character effects out of these older lenses because they have less coatings and things like that. These old lenses are also super cheap by comparison. You can pick up this legendary Nikon for like a couple $100. So here I am editing this, and I went into Photoshop and I said, okay, we already have kind of this softness, this imperfectness of this. So I actually went to Pictorialist, and Pictorialist is where I make these actions where I take things like Orton and Stieglitz and David Hamilton, and I try and go for those softer kind of looks. I don't try to make the image super detailed. So let's run the Hamilton look on this, and you can see how we're really accenting the softness. And it kind of makes the grass glow. And then I might go even further and do kind of a painted layer in that sky there, or use something like Alchemist and do kind of an overlay and then move it around, right? So I kind of have this sunfire overlay here to kind of bring in, instead of kind of that blowed out feel, that kind of warm sun glow coming across the scene. Let's turn that down a little bit. But you see what I'm doing here? I'm actually using the fact that there's flares and there's less detail, instead of say like, how can I fix this? What AI can I use to fix this? The goal is that soft David Hamilton, that kind of look. And I won't do this to every image. I'll take the best of the best and I'll use like a process, like a preset, masking and Lightroom, all that, and then paste it to all the similar images in the workflow sense. And then I'll come in and I will go to Photoshop and use actions, you know, like Loomis, like Alchemist, like Pictorialist on the best images to get my final look. So yes, you usually want to be in focus. Yes, you usually want a shutter speed that keeps your subject sharp. Although sometimes taking a lower shutter speed and letting them dance or move or letting cars drive by, this could completely change the atmosphere of your images. If you look back to masters like Stieglitz, you oftentimes see there's like this softness in their photos, there's blurriness, there's motion. And we tend to think, oh, that was taken 100 years ago. That's why the cameras weren't that good. It's actually a myth that then they couldn't get sharp images and now we can. An old 8x10 glass plate has way more resolution in it than almost all of the digital cameras that any of you can get today. But the point is that they understood using shadow, like I talk about in my shadow hackers workshops all the time. And you can come to one of those for free. I'll put a link in the comments. Using motion, using atmosphere, all the things that in this AI world and slider world, they're trying to make us perfect images. Lenses that are perfectly sharp, that have no flares, no chromatic aberration, you know, use your lens hood, all this stuff. Look at these two here. They both have a strobe. They both have the same spot that they're in. One, I'm moving into the sun and intentionally letting it flare and then processing it for that very soft kind of dreamy look. And then over here, we have one where I move the sun behind a little bit. Now, sure, I could take this and do a softer Hamilton look on it. Neither of these are bad. But which one do you like the best? To me, the softer one actually has a more dreamy, atmospheric, cinematic, if you will, kind of feel, even though they're both good photos. But notice how different both of these are, even though they were shot on the same lens at the same time, in the same place, the same model, the same outfit. And the difference was, number one, in camera, just a little bit of movement in how I let the light touch the lens and blend with the shadows, and how they were edited in post, actually both with the same preset initially, but one accenting the softness, the flare, the glare, all that kind of stuff by pushing that process a little further, and the other retaining a bit more crispness and contrastiness. Now, on some of the final shots, I switched to the Sony a5 MKIII, which is a great lens, very sharp, coated, modern, the whole works. And it also had a great look. The point is not that you shouldn't use a great lens, it's that your best lens isn't always your best lens. Sometimes atmosphere, both in the camera and in the edit, and how a lens makes you feel. A vintage lens does make you shoot differently. It makes you see and frame differently. When you come to editing, it's not that you shouldn't do clear, strong, bright edits, but also, you should understand that pushing sliders isn't what makes the image. Sometimes lower clarity, lower saturations, a little bit of grain can make the image more powerful and more dramatic. If you stop obsessing over perfection, clarity, sharpness, both in the camera with the lens you choose, the camera you choose, the sensor you choose, as well as in post-production by trying to crank up clarity and sharpness and use the sliders and clone everything out that's imperfect, what you will actually get is images that have soul, images that have more feeling, images that clients love, images that look great on walls, images that look like stills out of a Hollywood movie. You can decide how far to go with that, which effects to use, what color mixes, layers, actions, blurs, all that kind of stuff. But understand that the camera is where we visualize and we start the process, and the post-production is the print room, it's the dark room, and that's where we finish that visualization. Both sides of those, if you stop obsessing over perfect quality and you start relaxing and letting yourself feel your photographs, it will change your process, and it will change how you shoot the session, the landscape, the street photography in the first place, and it will also change how you edit. And along the way, then you'll start understanding why shadow is actually the key to creating contrast, to creating atmosphere. That's why the painters focused on it so much. And then we got to photography, and particularly digital, and we started pushing everything with sliders, and our oranges and our greens were off the charts, and everything was lifted, and we were afraid of the dark and shadows, and we always pushed them up. You don't need to do that. It's okay to have shadows. It's okay to have a little movement. It's okay to have a little glare. And when I started to realize that, my portraits got so much better. And that's just why I wanted to share with you guys today, because I thought this session was really fun and it really exemplified that process. I'll put some links to some of the things I've mentioned and freebies and stuff if you want to check them out. I hope you found this useful, and regardless, that you will go out and put it to work and get a little inspired by it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit that like, subscribe, bell icon. You know the drill, and we will see you next time. I'm gonna go take some photos. Peace.